So, hello everyone, and thanks for listening in to this presentation. I will be talking about launching SD-WAN services on the internet today, and I'm doing this remote, as you all know the reasons why. So let's get into this. For those of you that doesn't know Telia Carrier, you know we are one of the companies that started in the IP era in the late 90s when large internet backbones were started to be built. And most of the things we're doing today comes from the foundation we've laid over the years. We've been through hyperscale eras when everything had to be faster and more everywhere. And right now we're going into what we call the third era, which is practically when enterprises are thinking about, using the cloud much more and using the public internet much more, and hence my presentation today. So there is really a new world here, enterprises are really thinking about building their networks very different, and obviously this has big impact on how service providers will provide services. These are things you all know, of course. There's a lot of indications that everything goes towards the cloud, that people will use public internet in a much bigger way going forward, and so on. So this is really the reasons why this presentation, and I'll give my insight as Telia Carrier is one of the major IP backbones around. One of the things that I saw from Gartner was when they said, that about 70% of large enterprises will have only internet connections for small and remote branch offices, which obviously means that the public internet will become more and more important for how enterprises are running their traffic. So let's look into this. So presentation, the focus is really how can I use the public internet, and is that really a good idea to use it everywhere? The other thing is, of course, how do I access the public internet? Are there various options here? What is the best option here? And the last piece, we all think about security all the time. Is there anything that has to do with the public internet and security, and what can your service provider do here? So that's kind of the focus of the day. And the first topic is, of course, the public internet itself. What is it really, and how does it work? And for you who don't really know this, public internet is practically around 92,000 networks, AS numbers around, all connected to each other in some way or form. The crazy thing, or the big thing with public internet, is that it's still a very trust-based network. It's the best effort network, but it's really based on trust between the service provider, between the operators. There are no government who can rule and set the guidelines and tell people how to behave. It is all based on rules that service providers are setting together. And therefore I call it a very trust-based network, of course. When it works really fine. It's absolutely ideal for cloud services. If you have a cloud service in one part of the world and you want to access it from another part of the world, the traffic will find its way. But of course, everything that is best effort is always best effort when it works, and sometimes it might not even work. If you want to think about what forms the internet today, and I think most of you know this already, but of course, there are a number of AS number there who covers large geographical areas, sometimes referred to tier 1 internet backbones. There are more regional operators and there are more local operators. And then, of course, there are internet exchange points. Internet wouldn't be anything if it wasn't content on it, of course. We have the cloud providers who are now connected to the internet so people can store their data somewhere else and not in the basement of the headquarters. So basically the internet today, there's a lot of actors on it. There's a big ecosystem here, and it's very important that the entire ecosystem works for internet to really work. All these pieces are very important and needed for this piece. And basically also just a reminder here, when we talk about cloud services on the internet, I saw a report where it said that actually 30% of the failures of the cloud has to do with the network. So of course, if everyone is going to use the public internet, or many will use the public internet to connect to the cloud, then of course the network itself is very important. Sometimes people believe that it's only when the servers goes down that the cloud goes down, but it's not true really. You need to have the correct network interface as well. That's very important here as well. So if we look at the public internet, then the challenges the public internet have, we typically divide them into sort of the first, the middle, and the last mile here. And of course, the first mile is, how do the end users connect to the public internet? And there are very many ways of doing that. And I'll show you later on the ways they can do that. But it's the key here in this aspect is, of course, who they connect to and who are they in turn connected to. If they connect to someone who's connecting to someone who's connecting to someone through the public internet, your traffic might take a very long way to reach the endpoint or the cloud you want to reach. So that's key, ask your ISP, who are you connected to? Second piece is the middle mile. And here, of course, if you have content very far away from everything else, you want to make sure that that content is as reachable as possible for everyone that wants to reach that content. And here, using a global internet provider could be a very good idea because they have built these long distance networks for optimal performance of traffic going long distances. If you traverse a lot of networks in between, you might find delays, you might see that your applications is not working perfectly and so on. So that's very key to find the right solution for the middle mile. And then, of course, in the end, how do you actually connect to the cloud service? Most of the global tier ones are directly connected to the clouds. Some colocation providers are, of course, connected to the cloud, and some local ISPs are. So again, make sure you connect in the best way in the last mile, because really the traffic can take various routes here, and you always want to have the shortest route between your user and your cloud services. So that's key here. How do you find this out? There are various ways, there are various rankings out there. I'm not going to go through them. I would argue that the KAIDA ranking you see on the right hand side here is a really good one. It says how many prefixes or how many IP addresses can be found underneath each carrier, and that's a good indication of how good they are in providing these type of services. Again, internet is a big ecosystem, and therefore it's very important that the service provider you're connecting to have this ecosystem within them. Are they connected to all the top clouds in the world? Are they connected to the security providers in the cloud, the CDNs out there, and so on? So again, very important to be connected to the right networks here. Maybe not the largest network, but the right networks. Make sure they have the right connections and the right ecosystem behind them. That's very important. So with this to be said, when you talk about enterprise services using the public internet, I think the options are really as many as you like. This is just an example of a customer that we dealt with and we provided a solution for. And of course, a mix of internet backbone, private IP VPN, and all that stuff is, of course, the thing you want to provide your customers. You want to give them as many options as they have to make sure that they always feel that they are driving the solution and it's not your service provider that's pushing a solution towards them. And I would say public internet is really good for that because it's very scalable and so on. So public internet is a really good thing to build your part of your IP network and your WAN on. So what are the options then? And where can some people argue that it has to be lower cost all the time. And of course, if you look at, the various options you have, we have this dedicated internet access that is becoming more and more popular, which practically means that a broadband provider will guarantee the bandwidth between the end user and his or her network. That's the good thing with that one. You're not sharing that traffic, because the other way of doing this is, of course, using a normal broadband connection where the bandwidth is shared. If many uses it, it might be congestions. You might not have the optimal performance there, but at the same time, it always comes at a lower cost. So here again, how important are your traffic, and the solution is typically dependent on the importance of your traffic. And this is all supposed to be compared to the sort of traditional way of doing this, the MPLS way, where a service provider not only guarantees the bandwidth in the first mile, they can also guarantee the bandwidth all the way to the cloud. So of course, for some part of your traffic, MPLS is still the best solution and still the preferred solution. So remember here, think about really, what do I want? What is it that I'm after? What type of services, what type of application am I running? How many users do I have? How critical is it that it's always up and running? All of this will basically in the end decide what solution you're going to go for. And I would argue that a combination of some broadband connections, some dedicated internet access, and some MPLS is absolutely the way forward. People who say that MPLS is dead, No, it's not. Absolutely not. You need that for some type of traffic. You want it to be guaranteed all the way to the cloud or all the way to whatever application you're using in the cloud. So this is, of course, very important to remember because, of course, if you look at the cost for a service provider to provide the service and therefore in the end the price to the customer, it really has to do with the way we are providing these type of services. And of course, an MPLS service comes at a higher cost because there are more equipment involved. Then of course in the end, it's always up to the service provider to decide what margins they want and how they want to price that product. But I would say that it typically comes at a slightly higher cost. And then of course the dedicated internet access, you need more equipment to be able to dedicate traffic and not share with others. When you share the cost as well, and therefore it becomes a lower price to it. So again, you can expect some difference in price here, and of course it's in the end up to your service provider to put the margins on here. But of course, for everyone, think about the business continuity risk. That's the key here, to provide these. And I would say, SD-WAN, building your network on the internet, as we talked about, and the topic of this speech, I think that model is really simple because in the end, it is really only the CP itself. Of course, you need to have something that starts and stops the traffic at the end user. But then in reality, the only cost is the access cost there. Then it's always up to the service provider. Of course, there is some service licensing fees for the SD-WAN service itself. But the SD-WAN world is fairly simple to price out when you know the local access costs. Everything else is known. So I would say in the SD-WAN world, we will see much quicker and much faster response times to quoting and pricing here because it's fairly simple to price this out. So I would say, expect lower prices for SD-WAN, but it's always up to the service provider to decide what margins they want. So, okay, last topic then, security. Let's think about, and this is not going to be talking about security in the cloud or security solutions in the office. This is about internet, How can a service provider do more security on the internet? Because there are thousands of security areas to think about and firewalls and blah, blah, blah. But I want to talk about, what can a service provider do? And of course, as I said, the other solutions are, you can always decide, should you have it on-prem or should you have it in the cloud? For those people who decide to have it in the cloud, there are, of course, ways of protecting the public internet much better. That has nothing to do with these type of security solutions. These should be done by security companies. But I can say that service providers can do a lot more as well to support the security overall. And we typically refer it to be, your first line of defense, making sure that some type of traffic that you don't want to see, as a DDoS attack, for instance, that's a perfect thing for a service provider to mitigate and actually filter away in the networks, Most service providers have DDoS filters in there. We can scrub the traffic. We can remove unwanted traffic. Fairly simple. And I can now see this year solutions where we can actually scrub traffic for other providers as well, not by kind of hijacking that traffic, but making sure that an enterprise is sort of defended from most of the traffic that they don't want to have. I just took a look at the DDoS traffic, and of course, when traffic increased with COVID enormously, obviously the DDoS attacks as well, and therefore it's more important than ever to have a very good DDoS protection here. Just to show early weekdays are still the most popular days for your traffic, and of course in the evening when people have time to do this type of stuff. But it's important here to ask your service provider, how can you protect my traffic? Just to show you a not a funny example really, but an example from the Nordics that I've seen, and that's really when the schools started over here. We could see that the attacks started to come at a much higher rate, and actually the attacks started to come during lunchtime, or really during school time, really. This is something we've seen before, but this year was much more than before. I don't know if it was because kids didn't go to school in the spring and now went back to school in the autumn, but we've seen an increase in DDoS attacks during this time. Last thing I want to talk about in security is, of course, this RPC RPKI, another way for a service provider to guarantee that the traffic they have on the public internet is a legitimate traffic that they can use. Again, there is ways of hijacking traffic on the public internet, but RPKI guarantees that a service provider are only providing the traffic they're allowed to provide. They're only providing the cloud services they're only allowed to announce. And this again is something that's going to help public internet to become a much more safe place. And we will not see these hijackings or route leaks that we've seen in the past. And just to show you a slide here, among the top tier 1 global networks, it is actually happening right now. Most of them are on a journey to implement RPKI, and therefore internet will be a much more safe place going forward, which is of course very good. So in summary, I asked in the beginning, is using the public cloud a good idea? And I would argue, yes, it is, for some services. I'm sure you want some services more protected than others, and then MPLS is still the absolute best choice there. But for some services, public internet is a really good idea. It's extremely scalable. It's extremely good for traffic, finding ways of getting your traffic to the cloud. So a good idea. Second one we talked about is sort of access and reliability. Does it come at different costs? I would argue that the only real cost difference here is the access cost. The rest is up to your service provider. Of course, there is more costs involved providing an MPLS service because there's more equipment involved. But at the end of the day, it's up to the service provider to provide you this. But for everyone, is important, how critical is this traffic to me? Does it always need to be up and running? That's the important thing here. If it doesn't need to be up and running all the time and you can live a couple of hours with an outage, there's simple and cheap solutions for that. Last one is how to plan and think about security. And of course, you should work with your service provider and your security specialists in combination here. I think security specialists are really good at firewalling and all that stuff. That's important. But your service provider can absolutely do a lot of things here as well. And that's very important. Ask your service provider, what type of security solutions do you have implemented for the public backbone? Do you have DDoS protection where you can scrub traffic from DDoS attacks? Do you have RPKI finally implemented now and are therefore only announcing traffic you're allowed to announce? So remember, service providers can do a lot of things in here in the secure world. It's not only security companies here, service provider will play a big role in here as well. So with that, I say thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to hopefully meet everyone next year when this event goes more live, when hopefully this pandemic is over. But for now, thank you very much for listening in.